In Delhi, cold water work is night work because every part of this business is illegal. A powerful water mafia drills wells 300 feet deep and pumps groundwater into huge tanker trucks under cover of night. As the city of 24 million grows, its formal water supply cannot keep up. Roughly 30 to 40% of Delhi's residents have no tap water at all. Everyone, rich and poor alike, must buy from this black market. Over time, this underground trade expanded, bigger trucks, bigger profits. But the aquifers cannot sustain endless pumping. Experts warn that if current trends continue, even the water mafia's wells will eventually run dry, and that is when the real crisis will begin. This crisis is not unique to Delhi. Globally, less than 1% of the world's water is readily usable by people, and demand is rising fast. We keep polluting fresh water, shrinking that tiny supply even more. Hotter temperatures and erratic rains are already destabilizing societies around the world. Experts warn that when water runs short, people either adapt or move, or sometimes simply perish. Migration is already picking up. Since 2015, over 1 million people, mostly Syrians and Iraqis, have fled their homes and crossed into Europe. On the Greek island of Lesbos, around 1,000 refugees land each day in battered boats. Many have fled not only war, but drought and crop failure. A Syrian-American journalist notes the hidden role of water. A 5-year drought from 2006 devastated over half of Syria's farmland. Some 2.5 million farming families lost their livelihoods and fled to northern crowded cities. Young men, unemployed and frustrated, found themselves in the path of a brewing war. By 2015, that war had broken out and Syria was engulfed in conflict. The result was a historic migration. Europe faced its largest influx since WW2. The United Nations now hesitates to call these newcomers refugees, instead calling many environmental migrants because their flight was triggered by drought and scarcity. Agencies warn that by mid-century, tens or hundreds of millions could be uprooted by climate and water stress, far beyond what current asylum systems can handle. Half of Africa, much of South and Southeast Asia, and most of the Middle East are regions on high alert. In these places, water problems can quickly lead to conflict. Consider Syria's rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates begin in Turkey, where dams now throttle their flow. Syria and Iraq downstream have little recourse. As one expert notes, in any shared basin, the lowest riparian, the country furthest downriver, often has no control over the water. In fact, the Middle East, already one of the driest parts of the world, could soon count half its nations among the world's most water-stressed. The question looms, what happens when water becomes more valuable than oil? Militants, too, have weaponized water. ISIS provides a stark example. In 2013-14, ISIS fighters seized dams and wells on the Euphrates and Tigris. They cut off fuel to rebel villages so pumps would stop, and in cities they charged high fees as a makeshift water tax to fund their fighters. In 2014, ISIS even captured Iraq's Mosul Dam, the country's largest. Seizing that dam gave them the power to flood hundreds of thousands downstream. A single release could have sent a 70-foot wall of water cascading toward Baghdad. In 2017, U.S. and Kurdish forces recaptured Mosul Dam, averting that catastrophe. Governments are noticing. Water was once a soft issue, but now it's clearly a security concern. Defense analysts agree that droughts and booming populations can destabilize key regions. They warn that in the Middle East today, solving the water crisis might take nothing short of a miracle. Between the desert and the Mediterranean lies one example of hope. Israel, once on the brink of running out of water, has turned the tide. After its worst drought ever in 2009, Israel slashed usage by 20% through conservation campaigns and invested heavily in technology. Now Israel recycles about 85% of its wastewater and uses massive desalination plants. Today, roughly 60% of Israel's drinking water comes from desalinated seawater. Israel can proudly say, "We have no water problem." In fact, it now produces more water than it consumes. Desalination still has its drawbacks. It is energy intensive and currently 3 to 4 times more expensive than conventional water. It also produces a toxic brine that must be managed. But the technology is improving. If desalination costs fall enough in the future, it could upend global water politics. For now, Israel leads the way. It produces more water than it consumes. But this success has a dark side. Since 1967, Israel has occupied the West Bank and most of its water. The disparity is stark. About 30% of Palestinians in the West Bank receive running water less than 3 hours per week. Hundreds of thousands have no piped water at all. They must buy from expensive tankers and store it in black rooftop cisterns, sometimes called black gold. Meanwhile, the West Bank sits atop huge aquifers. Israel's national water company, Mekorot, drills and owns many of the wells in the West Bank. Palestinians put it bluntly, Mekorot is basically selling them their own water. Across the border, Gaza's people know a similar story. After Israel's 2005 withdrawal, the coastal aquifer was left unregulated. Over 6,000 shallow wells were drilled in Gaza, draining that aquifer to the point where it is now mostly saline. Today, Gaza's water is largely unsafe to drink, a crisis experts warn could soon be irreversible. This fuels intense conflict. Palestinians argue that the wells lie under their land, so the water should belong to them. Israelis counter that those aquifers have fed their fields since 1950s and caution against overuse. In the 1995 Oslo Accords, over 80% of the West Bank's water was allotted to Israel, 20% to the Palestinians. That was supposed to be temporary, but 20 years later it remains largely in place. The Palestinian population has surged, while its water share has not, a recipe for anger. The inequality extends to the settlements. Israel even connects all its West Bank settlements to the national grid. Roughly 380,000 settlers in about 120 settlements use far more water per person than the 2.8 million Palestinians in the same territory. Palestinian villagers seethe. "The settlements are taking almost all our water," one said. "When you don't have water, you can't stay on your land." From the Palestinian view, restricting their water supply is a way to force them out of their homeland. Water has fueled conflict in this region for generations. Of 38 recorded violent disputes over shared water worldwide since 1948, 27 involved Israel and its neighbors. In 1967, Israel captured key water sources, the Golan Heights, which feed the Jordan River, and the West Bank aquifers. In one stroke, Israel went from being dependent on its neighbors' water to controlling the regional taps. One general later said the Six-Day War was as much about water as about land. Today, Israel can even talk about sharing its surplus. Some officials now say Israel could sell or give water to its neighbors. Palestinians scoff. "If you have no water crisis, then why not give us back what was taken?" They warn that continuing this unwise control will invite more violence. The Palestinian people will not keep silent forever, one leader said. When one group controls another's water, resentment and conflict are inevitable. The water story doesn't end there. A much larger contest is brewing between China and India. The Brahmaputra River, which starts on the Tibetan Plateau, flows through India into Bangladesh and sustains hundreds of millions. Now China effectively holds the tap. Almost all of the Brahmaputra's waters originate in Tibet, under Chinese control. China itself also faces water alarm. Northeastern China is in the grip of its worst drought in decades, and the North China Plains aquifers have been emptied by overuse. Many of China's rivers are polluted or shrinking. To cope, China has built almost 1 million dams, more than any other country. Even so, China's fresh water per person is only about 1/3 the world average. Beijing knows this could threaten stability. By controlling Tibet, China effectively controls the headwaters of many of Asia's rivers. Over 1 billion people, roughly 1/5 of humanity, depend on water that starts on the Tibetan Plateau. Already, China has erected 11 major dams on the Upper Mekong or Longkong and Salween or Nuayang rivers and plans dozens more. Downstream nations like Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam fear China's dams will choke off their water, even though Beijing insists the dams are just for hydropower. In this contest, China is the hydro-hegemon of Asia. China's ambitions go even further. It built the South-North Water Transfer Project to pump water from the Yangtze in the south all the way up to Beijing. This unprecedented engineering project has no parallel. Now India is alarmed, fearing China will do the same with the Brahmaputra. Many Indian experts openly call it a water war, not a war with guns, but a one-sided grabbing of shared rivers. Some argue that if China diverts the Brahmaputra's headwaters, India may need to be ready to respond. What is a water war? It may not look like a conventional battle. It could be a cyber attack on a dam's controls or a sudden release of floodwaters. But analysts warn, if nations don't adapt, we are likely to see more conflicts, sabotage, or standoffs over water. Full-scale military wars over water might remain rare, but the competition and tension are certain to rise. The good news is that it's not too late. New technologies, smarter irrigation, water recycling, cheaper desalination offer hope. Diplomacy can also help ensure fair sharing of rivers, but time is short. The scenes are clear. From Delhi's midnight tankers to Syria's parched fields, from Israel's desert farms to the rivers high in the Himalayas, water is life, and it's becoming scarce. History tells us that where water runs out, conflict follows. The question now is whether we will innovate and cooperate before the taps run dry.